The cold wind blew hard in the north, but Robb Stark wasn't dead. Everyone thought the young wolf had fallen at the Red Wedding. They thought the Freys had ended the Stark bloodline, that the North was finished. But the truth was something else. Robb had survived barely. His bannermen were betrayed, his mother Catelyn was gone, and his wife Talisa was murdered before his eyes. But Robb lived. A loyal servant of House Stark had pulled him away in the chaos, half dead, covered in blood. They hid him in a cart full of hay and took him far away from the twins. Robb healed slowly, both in body and spirit. The world thought he was gone. Even the North had started to bow to the Boltons, the new wardens. But Robb waited, watched and listened. It took him 2 long years to return. He no longer looked like the young wolf. His face had changed, harder, colder. His eyes were sharper. He had learned to be careful, to move in silence. The war had taught him pain, but also patience. He had seen betrayal. He had tasted defeat. But now he had returned, not for glory, but for revenge. In the north, Ramsay Bolton ruled from Winterfell. He wore furs like a king, tortured for fun, and painted his halls with the blood of those who dared speak Stark's name. He had taken Winterfell like a thief in the night. The people feared him, but deep inside, many still whispered, "The North remembers." When Robb reached the woods near Winterfell, he met with the few who were still loyal. Some were old bannermen, small lords who had bent the knee to the Boltons, but hated them in silence. Others were common folk, farmers and hunters, who still believed in House Stark. He also found wildlings, former enemies, now ready to stand beside him because Ramsay was worse than any threat from beyond the wall. Jon Snow was gone, sent to the wall and now lost beyond it. Sansa was believed to be dead. Arya, Bran and Rickon were nowhere. Robb didn't even know if his siblings were alive. But he had one purpose now, take back Winterfell and make the Boltons pay. One night, under the dark sky, Robb stood before a fire, speaking to the men who had gathered. "They killed my mother," he said quietly. "They butchered my wife and unborn child. They broke their oaths. They took our home. They wear the Stark name as if it means nothing. But they forget one thing. We are still here." His voice wasn't loud, but every man there leaned in to hear it. The fire crackled as he continued. "Winterfell is ours. We will take it back. Ramsay Bolton will fall, and the wolves will howl again." The camp was silent for a moment, then one man stepped forward. It was Lord Manderley, older, heavier, and full of grief. "We followed you once, my lord, and we'll follow you again." Others joined, one by one. Some cried. Some knelt. Others shouted, "The king in the north." But Robb shook his head. "No more kings. No more pride. This is not for crowns. This is for justice." As the men cheered, somewhere deep in Winterfell, Ramsay Bolton sat in his hall, smiling at screams coming from his dungeons. He didn't know yet, but the true wolf was coming back to his den. The snow had started to fall heavier, turning the woods around Winterfell into a silent white world. Robb Stark stood wrapped in a thick black cloak, his direwolf Grey Wind at his side. The old beast had survived too, though he now carried scars across his neck and chest, just like his master. Grey Wind didn't howl anymore. He moved like a shadow, quiet and angry, just like the man he followed. Robb had only a few hundred men. Ramsay had more, thousands, including traitor lords from the north who had bent the knee. But Robb didn't care. He wasn't marching to start a war. He was here to end one. He had learned from his mistakes. The old Robb had trusted too easily, believed too much in honor and oaths. Now he moved in silence, striking like a hunter in the dark. Every night, Ramsay's patrols started disappearing. One group of Bolton men went out to check the eastern woods. They never returned. 2 nights later, another group vanished near the western hills. Only a single rider came back, his horse covered in blood, his eyes wild with terror. He kept screaming, "The wolf! The wolf is back!" Ramsay laughed when he heard it. "Let them believe in ghosts," he said, sipping wine from a cup carved from a skull. "It'll make killing them more fun." But something deep inside Ramsay twisted. Fear. The north had many things. Cold, darkness, wild beasts. But the one thing it had always feared the most was a Stark on the warpath. Then came the day when the first raven arrived. A message written in Robb's hand. You wear my father's home like it belongs to you. You cut off my brother's head. You betrayed the North. You think this land is yours. You're wrong. I'm coming. Robb Stark Ramsay crushed the letter and threw it into the fire. Let the bastard come, he snarled. I'll flay him myself. But Robb didn't come straight at Winterfell. He sent his people to speak to the villagers quietly. At first they were afraid to speak. Ramsay had eyes everywhere. But when the farmers saw Grey Wind, saw Robb with his scarred face and burning eyes, they knew. The young wolf had returned. Old banners came down from storage. Hidden swords were pulled from floorboards. Slowly, carefully, the North started to wake up. Lord Glover sent word in secret. The Mormonts remember. The Umbers stayed silent, but Robb had heard rumors. Small John had betrayed Rickon. That alone would be dealt with soon enough. Robb's forces began to grow, not with knights, but with the common folk. Tanners, hunters, even thieves. Men and women who had suffered under Ramsay's rule, who had lost children to his hunts, wives to his dungeons. They didn't want glory. They wanted blood. Meanwhile, inside Winterfell, things were shifting. Some of Ramsay's soldiers started whispering. Was it true? Had Robb Stark really survived? Was he raising an army? Would the North turn again? Ramsay didn't care for whispers. He found the first soldier who spoke the name Robb and fed him to his hounds. Then he doubled the patrols and lined the walls with archers. But something had changed. The air in Winterfell felt tense, uncertain. Then came the night of fire. Robb sent a small team of wildlings and northern scouts to the outer farms controlled by Bolton men. They didn't fight. They burned! 4 outposts, gone in one night. No bodies left, just smoke, and the carved sign of a direwolf burned into the ground. Panic started spreading in Ramsay's ranks. Back in camp, Robb knelt by a map, marking every weak point in Winterfell. He knew those walls better than anyone alive. He had walked them as a boy. He had trained in that yard. His father had ruled from that hall. And now a monster sat in his place. One of his scouts, a young girl no older than Arya once was, came running back with a message. Ramsay is bringing out the flayed men, she said, eyes shaking. He nailed 3 villagers to the gates. Said he'd do the same to anyone who speaks your name. Robb's jaw tightened. He's scared. Aye, said Lord Manderley beside him. But a scared dog still bites. Robb looked at Grey Wind. Then we cut off the head. He stood slowly, rolling up the map. Prepare the men. We don't wait for more banners. We move at dawn. Manderley frowned. You sure, my lord? We're outnumbered. Robb's eyes were cold as ice. We have truth. We have the North. And we have the only thing Ramsay Bolton fears. What's that? The girl scout asked. Robb turned toward Winterfell's direction, his voice like a whisper from the grave. Me. The snowstorm hit just before dawn. The sky was dark, thick with clouds, and the world was drowned in white. Wind howled like 1,000 ghosts across the hills around Winterfell. It was the kind of cold that burned into your bones, the kind only northerners knew how to survive. And that was exactly what Robb Stark needed. While Ramsay's soldiers tried to guard the walls, half frozen and barely awake, Robb's men moved through the snow like shadows, silent, unseen. Robb didn't want a grand charge or banners waving. That's what had gotten him killed the first time. This time, there would be no mercy. No warning. He'd split his small force into 4 groups. One would set fire to the southern stables to cause panic. Another would attack the supply lines to the west. The third would cut down Ramsay's lookouts on the towers. And Robb was leading the 4th group, right through the secret tunnel Maester Leuven once told him about. A hidden passage, long forgotten, buried beneath the crypts of Winterfell. Grey Wind led the way, his fur almost blending into the snow. His eyes glowed like twin embers in the dark. Behind him were Robb, Lord Manderley, the scout girl, and 20 of his best fighters, men who had lost too much to fear anything anymore. As they moved under the cold stone tunnels of Winterfell's crypts, Robb felt something stir deep inside him. He passed the statues of his ancestors, Lord Rickard, Lyanna, Brandon, and finally his father, Eddard Stark. He stopped for a moment. looked at the stone face of the man who had taught him honor. "I broke my vows, father," he whispered, "and it cost us everything. But I swear to you I'll make this right." He stood, jaw clenched, and kept moving. Above them, Ramsay Bolton woke to the sound of screaming, fire, smoke, steel clashing in the yard. One of his guards burst into his chamber, blood on his face, stuttering, "My lord, the north gate, it's been breached. Fire's in the west. They say Robb Stark." Ramsay grabbed the man by the throat and threw him into the wall. "He's dead, you fool, dead." But then the horns blew. 3 long blasts, not from Ramsay's men, from the towers. The Stark signal. Ramsay's eyes went wide. For the first time in his life, he doubted. Robb burst from the crypt tunnels like a thunderbolt, grey wind leaping out beside him, his men close behind. They took the guard post by surprise, slaughtering the Bolton men with ruthless precision. The snow turned red underfoot. Robb moved like a storm, silent, deadly. His sword, Ice Fang, cut through the cold air with the fury of 1,000 broken oaths. Each man he struck down was another name on the list, another payment in blood. He didn't care about prisoners. He didn't come to forgive. He came to reclaim. They stormed the inner yard just as Ramsay appeared on the battlements, flanked by his most loyal men. "Stark!" Ramsay shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I thought you were a ghost." Robb looked up at him, face pale, eyes full of fire. "I am," he said. "The ghost of every man you've flayed, every child you've hunted, every Stark you betrayed." Then the gates behind Robb flew open. The villagers, the wildlings, the hill clans, all pouring in like floodwaters. Some had no armor, some carried pitchforks instead of swords. But their eyes burned with fury, and their voices rose like thunder. The North remembers. Ramsay turned pale. He tried to retreat to his chambers, but found his path blocked. The men guarding his hall had vanished. One of them, a former Karstark, now stood with Robb. Ramsay ran. Robb chased. Through the halls of Winterfell they went, down blood-stained corridors, past rooms Ramsay had filled with screams for years. Now it was his turn to scream. Ramsay reached the kennel yard, hoping to call his hounds. He turned, breathless, shouting, "To me!" But the hounds didn't move. They stared at him, silent, hungry. Behind him, Robb stepped into the yard, sword raised. "It ends here," Robb said, voice low, steady. "You think this place belongs to you?" Ramsay hissed, backing away. "You think your family matters? You're just a boy playing war." "No," Robb replied. "I'm a wolf cleaning out the filth." Ramsay pulled a knife, but Grey Wind was faster. The beast lunged. Ramsay fell. Robb didn't watch. He turned his back as the screams echoed into the snow. Winterfell was his again, but peace was not. The snow had stopped by morning, but the blood hadn't. Winterfell's yard was quiet now. Smoke still curled from the blackened stables, and the bodies of Ramsay's men lay frozen where they had fallen. The banners of the flayed man had been torn down, trampled in the mud, and burned in the fire. In their place, the direwolf of House Stark flew once more over the walls. Robb stood at the top of the battlements, looking out over the north. The wind bit at his face, but he didn't flinch. Grey Wind sat beside him, blood still staining the fur around his jaw. His breathing was slow, steady, like he knew the war wasn't over, only quiet for now. Lord Manderley joined him, limping slightly from a cut on his leg. "You did it," he said, his voice low. "Winterfell is yours again." Robb didn't respond right away. His eyes stayed on the woods beyond the walls. "No," he said, "it's not mine. It was never mine. It belonged to my father, and after him to my brothers." Manderley gave a heavy sigh. "You are the last Stark now." Robb looked down at the yard where Ramsay's broken body still lay. "No, I can feel them. Jon, Arya, Bran, even Rickon. They're out there somewhere." He didn't say Sansa's name out loud. He couldn't. The memory of her wedding to Ramsay was something that twisted his stomach. If she was alive, if she had suffered under that monster. He couldn't bear the thought, but he would find her. All of them, he turned to Manderley. "Send ravens to every corner of the north. Tell them Winterfell stands again. Tell them the Boltons are dead. And what of the traitor lords?" Manderley asked, voice cautious. "The Umbers? The Karstarks?" They bent the knee to Ramsay. They gave him your brother. Robb's jaw tightened. Bring them, alive. I want to look them in the eye. 3 days later, the great hall of Winterfell burned with firelight. The walls echoed with the heavy steps of northern lords, returning one by one. Some came in shame, others in fear. Most came because they had no choice. They found Robb Stark sitting at the high seat, not as a king, not wearing a crown, but wearing the same dark leathers his father once wore. Behind him hung the old Stark banner, patched but proud. He called the first traitor forward, Small Jon Umber. The man had blood on his hands. He had handed over Rickon Stark to the Boltons, thinking Robb was dead, thinking the Boltons would rule forever. Robb stood, stepped down from the dais, and looked Small Jon in the face. You gave my little brother to a monster, Robb said. You watched him die? Small Jon's face twisted. I did what I had to. The Boltons would have flayed us alive if we hadn't. Robb struck him hard and fast. The room went silent. You had a choice, Robb said. And now I do too. He didn't order Small Jon's death. Not yet. He ordered him thrown in the dungeons. He would decide his fate after speaking with every man who had turned his back on House Stark. That night, Robb sat alone in the Godswood. The heart tree loomed over him, its red leaves rustling in the wind. He knelt before it, snow gathering on his shoulders. Father, he whispered, I should have listened. I chased glory. I thought I was a king. But all I did was break everything you built. Grey wind lay beside him, silent and still. I lost Mother. I lost Talisa. I lost everything. He stared up at the red face of the weirwood, its carved eyes crying sap like blood. I'm not here to be king anymore. I just want my family back. The wind carried no answer, only silence. But then footsteps crunched behind him. He turned sharply, hand on his sword, until he saw her, a woman in a dark cloak, her hair tangled, her face pale. But her eyes, blue, fierce, full of pain and fire. Sansa! Robb's voice cracked. She nodded slowly. Tears welled in her eyes. He rushed forward, wrapped his arms around her, and for the first time in years, he cried. They didn't speak for a long time. They just sat there together beneath the tree where their father once prayed. Finally, Sansa whispered, I thought you were dead. I was, Robb said quietly. But the North brought me back, she nodded. Then it's time to take it all. Robb looked into her eyes and saw something different, stronger, hardened. They had both died once. And now they were something else, not children, not royalty, just wolves in the snow. And the pack was coming back together. Winterfell was alive again, but it wasn't at peace. The snow-covered walls no longer echoed with screams, but the silence was heavy. The kind that comes after a storm, when the dead are buried and the living try to remember how to breathe again. Robb and Sansa walked the halls together for the first time in years. Each corner held a memory of their father's quiet strength, their mother's voice, the sounds of laughter from younger days when Winterfell was still a home. Now it was a fortress again, a broken one, healing piece by piece. The bannermen were restless. Every day more lords arrived, some loyal, some cautious, and some just waiting to see who would bleed next. The North had been torn apart by betrayal. Trust was rare, loyalty was fragile. And many still whispered that Robb Stark was supposed to be dead. But Robb stood before them anyway, not as a king, but as a Stark. We don't need another crown, he said to the gathered lords in the great hall. We need justice. We need unity. We need the North. He let Sansa stand beside him, tall and proud in her Stark furs. She had survived Ramsay. That alone gave her more strength than half the men in the room. She suffered under the Boltons, Robb continued, and she still stands. We all suffered, but if we keep fighting each other, we won't survive what's coming next. Lord Serwyn, one of the younger bannermen, frowned. What is coming next, my lord? Robb glanced at Sansa. Her eyes were colder now, more calculating, but she gave a small nod. Let him speak, Robb stepped forward. The wall has fallen quiet. I've heard no word from Jon. No word from Castle Black, and that silence frightens me more than all the Boltons put together. The room murmured. The wall had always been there, cold, distant, a mystery to most. But if it had truly gone silent? Lord Manderley grunted. I've heard rumors. Something stirring in the far north. Weldlings fleeing, White Walkers marching. Aye, Robb said, voice grim. We've been too busy fighting each other to notice the dead are marching. Some scoffed. Others grew pale, but Sansa didn't flinch. You don't have to believe it, she said clearly. You just have to be ready when it comes to your gates. The message was clear. The Starks weren't asking for faith. They were demanding preparation, but before they could unite the North against the storm beyond the wall, Robb had something else to do, clean out the rot still inside it. That night, he walked into the dungeons beneath Winterfell. The air was damp and cold, the torches burning low. 3 men were locked away in separate cells, small Jon Umber, Lord Harold Karstark, and a lesser lord from House Dustin. All had sworn to House Stark once. All had turned to the Boltons when the knives came out. Robb stood in front of Small Jon's cell, arms crossed. You served my father, he said. You drank his wine. Swore his oath. I did, Small Jon said, eyes dark. And I watched your family fall. What would you have done in my place? Watch my house burn for ghosts? Robb didn't answer. He simply unlocked the door. Small Jon flinched. So it's death then? No, Robb said. Not yet. You'll face trial in front of the North. Let them judge you. He moved to the next cell. Lord Karstark stood tall, unrepentant. You hung my father's kin, he sneered. Why should I bow to you? Because I spared your life, Robb said coldly. A mistake, maybe, but I won't let you die easy. The North will hear what you did. Every betrayal, every lie. Karstark spit on the floor. Robb didn't flinch. Good. Keep the fire in your belly. You'll need it when they're all watching. As Robb turned to leave, he passed the final cell. From the darkness, a voice croaked. You think you've won, boy, but war never ends. Not in the North. It only sleeps, Robb paused. He didn't recognize the voice at first. But then the light shifted, and he saw the eyes. Rose Bolton's cousin, one of the men who had helped plan the Red Wedding. He stepped closer. You were at the twins, the man smiled, teeth rotting. I watched your mother die, heard her scream, felt her blood hit the floor. Grey wind growled from the shadows. Robb stared for a long moment silent. Then he turned and walked away. Keep him alive. For now, back in the hall, Sansa waited. You're letting them live? She asked quietly. For now, Robb replied. The North deserves the truth. Let them see what betrayal looks like. Let them hear the lies. And when they beg for justice, I'll give it to them. She studied him. You've changed, so have you, he said, and together they stepped into the cold wind, their eyes on the storm coming from the north. The wind carried whispers now, from Bear Island to the hills of Last Hearth. Across villages still haunted by the Boltons' cruelty, word had spread. Robb Stark lives. And not just lives, rules. Winterfell's gates were open again, and its flames burned not with fear, but with fury. Inside its walls, the North gathered for something they hadn't seen in years, a trial of traitors. Snow covered the yard as dozens of lords stood in thick furs, eyes sharp and cold. Some had ridden through the blizzard to get there. They didn't come for politics. They came to watch justice, real justice, not whispered threats or secret flayings. Robb stood in front of them, no crown on his head, just a sword on his back and a name on his shoulders. Stark. The accused stood before the crowd, Small Jon Umber, Lord Karstark, and the foul-blooded Dustin cousin. Their chains clinked in the cold. This is not vengeance, Robb said loud enough for the godswood to hear. This is not blood for the sake of blood. This is the North remembering what betrayal looks like. He stepped towards Small Jon first. You delivered Rickon Stark to the Boltons. You pledged your sword to a flayer while your true liege lay in the snow. Do you deny it? Small Jon looked around the crowd, searching for sympathy. None came. I did what I had to, he muttered. You were dead. The Boltons were winning. Then you bent the knee for survival, Robb replied. Not loyalty, the lords murmured. Even the ones who had doubted Robb now looked at Small Jon with contempt. Then came Karstark. You've hated House Stark since I executed your father for killing innocent boys. I swore no oath to you, Karstark growled. You were a boy playing lord? "You're right," Robb said quietly. "I was a boy. Now I'm the man who will decide whether you hang or burn." And finally the third, Rose Bolton's cousin, who only smiled through broken teeth. "I'm not here to deny," he said proudly. "I was there at the twins. I drank to your death. I'd do it again." Grey Wind growled low, pacing behind Robb like death on four legs. The silence that followed was long. Then one voice broke it. "I say hang them all." Everyone turned. It was Lady Lyanna Mormont, not yet old enough to drink, but with more steel in her spine than most men twice her age. They turned on the north. "Let the trees have their bones," others shouted agreement. Lord Wyman Manderley nodded, muttering, "We gave them trust. They fed it to wolves." Robb didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I won't rule by fear," he said. "But I won't let cowardice wear the face of honor either." He walked to the old heart tree in the godswood, then turned back. "I will let the gods decide." That night, under the weirwood, the prisoners were judged. Not by a king, not by a crown, by the north. They were hanged by dawn, and still the snow kept falling. 2 days later, Robb stood in the map room, studying the north. The wall was still silent. No ravens, no sign of Jon. If the rumors were true, then death had already started marching, and they were not ready. Sansa entered, holding a letter in her gloved hands. "You'll want to read this," she said. He opened it. It was written in a hand he hadn't seen since he was a boy, stiff, sharp, familiar. To Robb Stark, the wall has fallen. The Night's Watch is gone. The dead are coming. Jon Snow. Robb stared at the words for a long time. "The wall," he whispered. "It's real, then?" "All of it," Sansa nodded. "Jon's alive, and he's coming here. Not alone." The next day the horns blew, 3 long blasts. Everyone in Winterfell froze. The watchers on the towers ran to the walls. A host was coming, not an army of enemies, but of the free folk. Wildlings, giants, and at their head, riding a black horse through the snow, was Jon Snow. He looked older, his eyes darker, but when he looked up at the walls of Winterfell, something in him softened. Robb was already waiting at the gates. The moment their eyes met, the world fell silent. 2 brothers, thought to be lost, one raised in war, the other raised from death. They stood face to face, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then Robb stepped forward. "You're late," he said, voice cracking. Jon smiled faintly. "So are you." They embraced, and the north watched as the 2 wolves came back together. But peace didn't follow. Jon's voice was cold as the wind. "They're coming, Robb. Not in years. Not in months. Now." Robb turned to his people. "No more trials. No more vengeance. The North has had its justice." He looked toward the wall, where darkness spread. "Now we fight for the living." The great hall of Winterfell had never been so full, yet it had never felt so tense. The hearth burned hot, casting long shadows across stone walls that had seen kings and killers, loyalty and betrayal, blood and fire. Around the ancient tables sat northern lords, wildling chieftains, and even a few men from the Vale who had answered the Raven's call. All of them listened, but none of them spoke. Jon Snow stood at the head of the room, his black cloak dripping snow, his voice steady as stone. "They are not raiders. They are not wildlings. They are not men. The dead do not tire. They do not feel. They do not break. And they are coming." A heavy silence followed. Some of the older lords shifted in their seats, unsure whether to believe in ghost stories. Others, especially those who had fought at the Red Wedding or lost kin to Ramsay, had seen enough horrors to know truth when it stood in front of them. Robb stood beside Jon. He hadn't said much since his brother's arrival. He'd been watching, listening, measuring. When Jon finally stepped back, Robb moved forward. "The North has been bleeding for years," he said. "We fought the Lannisters. We fought each other. Then we fought the Boltons. And now we are being asked to fight again." Murmurs rippled through the hall. "But this time," Robb continued, his voice rising, "we do not fight for land. We do not fight for banners. We fight for life, for the right to bury our dead instead of watch them rise." He paused, looking each lord in the eye. "If we don't stand together now, We will fall as bones beneath the snow. Lady Lyanna Mormont, seated on a small chair barely as tall as the table, stood up. The dead are coming, she said plainly. And I don't plan to become one of them. That was all it took. One by one, the lords began to nod, not out of hope, but out of necessity. Even the old bitter ones could feel it in their bones. Winter wasn't just coming, it was already here. For the next few days, Winterfell turned into a war camp. Blacksmiths worked through the night, reforging steel into dragonglass weapons brought from Eastwatch, small crates Jon had carried with him. The last of what the Night's Watch had before the wall fell. Children helped carry arrows. Wildlings taught northern men how to fight in tight snow. Even the women took up arms. No one was idle. Not anymore. Robb trained in the yard, his sword moving like a memory of his father. He was a different kind of warrior now, less proud, more deadly. He didn't shout commands. He simply fought harder than anyone else. Jon noticed it. One night, they stood together on the ramparts, watching the moon rise over the frozen woods. "You've changed," Jon said quietly. Robb gave a bitter smile. "You've died," Jon chuckled softly. "Aye, that too." There was a long silence. Finally, Robb asked, "What was it like?" "Death," Jon's face grew distant. "Empty, cold, like nothing mattered. Like I was nothing. And now," Jon turned to him, "now I fight so no one else has to feel that." Robb nodded. "Then we fight together." They clasped hands. The Stark brothers reunited, not just by blood, but by purpose. But not everyone was content with peace. That same night, in the lower levels of the castle, a shadow moved through the crypts. A rider cloaked in brown arrived quietly at the gates and was let in without notice. He wasn't northern. He had the gold of the south in his purse and a dagger hidden beneath his sleeve. He found the cells where Robb had locked away the final remnants of Bolton loyalty. Prisoners not yet executed, but kept for questioning. Among them rose Bolton's cousin, the one who had smiled through his own sentencing. The cloaked man whispered through the bars, "Winterfell grows strong again. But strong things can still be broken." The prisoner smirked. "And who sent you?" The rider only smiled. "Someone who still wears lions." A dagger was passed through the bars. The North was preparing for the dead, but the living still plotted. The next morning, Robb and Jon gathered their forces outside the gates. Sansa stood beside them, wrapped in her mother's old cloak. She looked at the men, Starks, wildlings, Vale Riders, blacksmiths, boys barely past 15, and she felt the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. Jon looked at Robb. "They're a day away, at most. How many?" Jon's voice was hollow. "Too many to count." Robb looked at the rising sun. "The last one they might see." Then he turned to his army. "You were born in winter, raised by it, forged in it," he called. "Now you'll meet the cold that never ends. But let them come. Let them try to take this land. They'll find more than snow waiting." He drew his sword. The sun caught the steel, making it shine like fire. "This is Winterfell," he shouted. "And we do not fall." And as the cry rose from the walls, across the icy fields, something darker moved on the horizon. A white walker on a dead horse. The war for the North had truly begun. The air felt wrong, not just cold, but hollow, like the wind had forgotten how to breathe. Even grey wind, usually fearless, growled low and stayed close to Robb's side. On the ridge just beyond Winterfell, a line of black and white crept forward, like a storm with no end. The dead had arrived. Jon Snow stood on the wall, looking through the frost-bitten air. "There's no end to them," he said. "They don't march. They consume." Robb didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the pale figure leading them, a white walker on a skeletal horse, blue eyes burning like frozen fire. It wasn't the Night King, not yet, but it was one of his generals. A sign they weren't here to threaten. They were here to destroy. Down in the yard, Sansa helped the last of the villagers into the crypts. She had organized the retreat herself. Children, old folk, anyone who couldn't fight. The crypts were dark, cold, but deep. Safer than the walls, hopefully. Inside Winterfell, every torch burned with dragon-glass-tipped arrows beside them. Every sword that could be reforged had been. Jon's wildlings manned the outer gates. The northern lords lined the ramparts. Even the Vale Knights stood ready, their southern armor stiff in the northern cold, and still, it didn't feel like enough. As the army of the dead grew nearer, the silence was louder than war drums. "They don't scream," Robb said. "They don't speak. They don't feel." Jon nodded. "They don't stop either." Then the first wave hit. Corpses, hundreds of them, rushed toward the walls with inhuman speed. Some were still in northern leathers, others in wildling rags. Their faces were wrong, twisted, like death had frozen them mid-scream. The archers loosed, flaming arrows struck true, dropping dozens. But dozens weren't enough. Then the ladders came. The dead climbed like insects. Spears pierced them, only for more to take their place. One got over the wall, then another. Blades clashed. Men screamed. Blood sprayed against the snow. Robb fought without rest. His sword moved like a storm, grey wind beside him tearing through flesh and bone. But for every dead thing that fell, two more climbed up. Jon fought too, Longclaw shining, his face grim. He moved with purpose, always aiming for the neck or the heart, where dragonglass did its work. But even he could feel it. This wasn't a battle they were holding. Off a flood with a shield of sticks. Then came the sound that froze every heart a horn, but not from the north, from the south. The gates behind them opened, and a fresh army rode in. Stark banners, Tully banners, and at their center, Arya. She wore black leather, blades at each hip, and a face like winter. She didn't wait for cheers. She rode straight past the stunned defenders and joined the fight without a word. Jon stared. "How could—" "Later," Robb said, eyes shining with something close to hope. "We win first." With Arya's group came more dragonglass, more fighters, fresh energy. The tide began to slow but not stop. Never stop. Then the shriek split the sky. Everyone looked up. A shape flew overhead, a dragon, but not the one they prayed for. It was Viserion, once Daenerys' child, now undead, with torn wings and fire of ice pouring from his mouth. He swept across the battlefield, a blast of blue flame turning men and stone to ash. The outer walls cracked. Screams filled the night, and behind him, walking slowly through the broken trees, the Night King. He didn't speak. He only stared, right at Robb Stark. Jon gripped Robb's arm. "He's here for me." Robb didn't flinch. "Then he'll have to go through us both." The brothers moved together, toward the field, toward the death that walked on two legs. The final fight was brutal. Jon met the Night King in the ruins of the Godswood, their blades clashing, sparks flying. But Longclaw was slow, heavy. The Night King moved like silence. Robb jumped in just as Jon fell back. His sword struck true, once, twice, burning through dead flesh. The Night King faltered. For the first time he reacted. Arya appeared like a shadow. She leapt, but the Night King caught her in midair. Then from the side, grey wind lunged. Jaws snapping into the Night King's arm. He staggered. Arya dropped. Jon rose and plunged Longclaw through his chest. There was a flash of blue light. Then silence. The Night King shattered into ice. All across the battlefield, the dead crumbled. It was over. Robb fell to his knees, breathless. Grey wind limped to his side. Jon dropped his sword. Arya stood among the snow and ash, and in the cold silence, Sansa emerged from the gate. She looked at them all, bloody, bruised, broken, and she smiled. Winterfell had held, the Starks had risen, and the North remembered.